The blizzard came down from the mountains like a vengeful spirit, turning the world white and deadly within minutes. And Laura Franklin knew with absolute certainty that she would die out here on this forsaken trail if she did not find shelter soon. Her fingers had gone numb inside her thin gloves hours ago, and her mare stumbled through snowdrifts that rose higher with each passing moment. The November wind of 1882 howled across the Wyoming territory with a fury that seemed personal, as if nature itself sought to punish her for daring to travel alone. She had left Cheyenne 3 days prior, heading north toward her sister's homestead near the Montana border, but somewhere along the way she had taken a wrong turn. Now she was hopelessly lost, and the storm that the locals had warned her about had finally caught up with her. Laura's late husband Thomas had been dead for 8 months now, taken by a fever that swept through their small farm outside Cheyenne. She was 24 years old and alone in a world that did not forgive women without protection. Her sister Margaret had written to her, begging her to come north and stay through the winter, and Laura had finally agreed. But now, as the cold seeped deeper into her bones and her vision blurred with snow and tears, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The mare whinnied in distress and nearly threw her as it struggled through another drift. Laura clung to the saddle horn, her teeth chattering so violently she feared they might crack. Through the white curtain of falling snow, she thought she saw a dark shape in the distance. At first she dismissed it as a hallucination, but as the mare carried her forward, the shape grew more solid. A barn. It was a barn, and beyond it, barely visible, a small ranch house with smoke rising from its chimney. "Thank God," she whispered through cracked lips. "Thank God." She urged her horse forward with the last of her strength, and the animal needed no encouragement to seek shelter. They crossed what must have been a fence line, though it was buried under snow, and made their way toward the barn. The large double doors were closed against the storm, but there was a smaller side entrance. Laura half fell from her saddle, her legs nearly giving out beneath her as her boots hit the ground. She had to lean against the mare for a long moment before she could move. With trembling hands, she tried the door. It was not locked. She pushed it open and led her horse inside, and the relief of being out of the wind was so profound that she nearly wept. The barn was warm, relatively speaking, heated by the presence of several horses and a few cattle in their stalls. The animals stirred and snorted at the intrusion, but settled quickly. Laura led her mare into an empty stall and removed the saddle with fingers that barely worked. She found a blanket hanging on a hook and threw it over the horse, then rubbed the animal down as best she could. The mare immediately went for the hay in the manger, and Laura was glad to see it. At least the horse would survive. She was not so certain about herself. Now that she had stopped moving, the full extent of her condition became apparent. She was soaked through to the skin, her traveling dress and cloak frozen stiff in places. Her feet felt like blocks of ice in her boots, and she could not stop shaking. She needed to get to the house, to find whoever lived here and beg for their help. But when she tried to walk toward the barn door, her legs gave out completely, and she collapsed into the hay. She tried to get up, but her body would not obey. The shaking had become violent tremors that racked her entire frame. Her vision darkened at the edges, and she felt herself slipping away. This was it, then. She would die in a stranger's barn, and no one would know what had become of her. Margaret would wait and wonder, and eventually she would assume the worst. Laura did not know how long she lay there before she heard the barn door open. Heavy footsteps crunched in the hay, and then a man's voice, deep and alarmed. "Jesus Christ." Strong hands turned her over, and she looked up into a face that seemed carved from granite. Dark eyes stared down at her with an intensity that should have frightened her, but all she felt was relief. The man was young, perhaps 30, with dark hair and a thick mustache. He wore a heavy coat covered in snow, and his breath formed clouds in the cold air. "I am sorry," Laura managed to say through chattering teeth. "I did not mean to trespass. The storm." "Do not talk," the man said. His voice was rough but not unkind. "You are half frozen. I need to get you inside." He bent and scooped her up as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. Laura wanted to protest that she could walk, that she was not an invalid, but the truth was she could not walk, and she was grateful beyond words for his strength. He carried her out of the barn and through the blizzard to the house, shouldering open the front door and bringing her into warmth and light. The interior of the ranch house was simple but well kept. A fire roared in the stone fireplace, and the single large room served as both kitchen and living area. The man kicked the door shut behind them and carried her to the fireplace, setting her down carefully in a wooden chair near the flames. "We need to get you out of these wet clothes," he said, already reaching for the fastenings of her cloak. "You will get pneumonia if we do not." Laura's mind protested through the fog of cold. She did not know this man. It was not proper, but she also knew he was right. She was wearing her death shroud unless she got warm and dry. "I can do it," she said, but her hands would not cooperate. The man watched her struggle for a moment, then gently pushed her hands away. "I am going to help you," he said, meeting her eyes. "I am not going to hurt you, madam. But you are in a bad way, and I have seen what happens to people who do not get warm fast enough. Do you understand?" Laura nodded, too weak to argue. The man worked quickly and efficiently, removing her frozen cloak and the layers beneath. He kept his eyes averted as much as possible, maintaining what modesty he could under the circumstances. When she was down to her undergarments, he wrapped her in thick wool blankets and moved her closer to the fire. Then he disappeared into what must have been a bedroom and returned with a clean, dry flannel shirt and woolen trousers. "These will be too big for you, but they are warm and dry," he said. "Can you manage, or do you need help?" "I can manage," Laura said, finding a shred of dignity somewhere. "Thank you." He nodded and turned his back, busying himself at the stove. Laura struggled into the clothes, her fingers slowly coming back to painful life as they warmed. The shirt hung to her knees and the trousers had to be rolled up several times, but they were indeed warm and dry, and she was grateful. When she was dressed, she pulled the blankets back around herself and settled into the chair. "I am decent," she said softly. The man turned back to her and gave a slight nod of approval. "Good. Now you need something hot in you." He ladled soup from a pot on the stove into a tin cup and brought it to her. "Drink this slowly. Do not gulp it or you will be sick." Laura took the cup in both hands, savoring the warmth that seeped into her palms. She sipped the broth carefully. It was simple fare, beef and vegetables, but it tasted like heaven. The man watched her for a moment, then went to the door and pulled his coat back on. "I need to see to your horse," he said. "I will be back shortly. Do not move from that fire." He was gone before she could thank him again. Laura sat in the warmth, drinking the soup and feeling life slowly return to her body. The shaking had mostly stopped, though her feet still ached terribly. She looked around the cabin, taking in her surroundings properly now that her mind was clearer. It was a bachelor's home, that much was obvious. There were no curtains on the windows, no decorative touches. Everything was functional and practical, but it was also clean and well organized. Books lined a shelf near the fireplace, and she was surprised to see several that she recognized, including works by Shakespeare and Dickens. A gun rack held 2 rifles near the door, and a pair of worn saddles sat in the corner. This was a working ranch, she guessed, though not a large one. The man returned after perhaps 15 minutes, stamping snow from his boots. He removed his coat and hung it on a peg by the door, then came to check on her. Up close, in the firelight, Laura could see his face more clearly. He was handsome in a rough way, with strong features and eyes that held both wariness and kindness. There was a scar along his jaw, old and faded, and his hands were calloused from hard work. "Your mare is settled," he said. "She should be fine. I gave her extra grain to help her warm up." "Thank you," Laura said. "You have been very kind. I am Laura Franklin. I was traveling from Cheyenne to my sister's homestead near the Montana border, but I got lost in the storm." The man studied her for a long moment. "Samuel Irwin," he said finally. "And you are a long way off course, Mrs. Franklin. Montana is west of here. You have been heading north into the high country." Laura felt her face flush with embarrassment. "I took a wrong turn somewhere. I thought I was following the right trail, but everything started to look the same, and then the storm came." "Lucky you found my place," Samuel said. "There is nothing else for miles in any direction. If you had missed it, well." He did not finish the sentence, but he did not need to. They both knew what would have happened. "How long do you think the storm will last?" Laura asked. Samuel moved to the window and looked out at the wall of white beyond the glass. "Hard to say. Could be a day, could be a week. These November storms in the high country can be unpredictable. We are stuck here until it blows over." The reality of her situation settled over Laura like another blanket. She was alone in a remote cabin with a strange man, and they would be trapped here together for days. If anyone in Cheyenne knew where she was, her reputation would be destroyed. But then, she reminded herself, she had no reputation left to protect. She was a widow, traveling alone. Society had already judged her. "I do not want to be a burden," she said quietly. "I will stay out of your way as much as possible." Samuel turned from the window and gave her an odd look. "You are not a burden, Mrs. Franklin. You are a human being who needed help, and I gave it. That is what people do out here. We look after each other because if we do not, we all die." He paused. "You can have the bedroom. I will sleep out here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Laura protested. "This is your home." "And you are my guest," Samuel said firmly. "The matter is settled. Now you should rest. You have been through an ordeal and your body needs to recover." Laura wanted to argue, but she was suddenly overwhelmingly tired. The warmth of the fire and the hot soup had made her realize just how exhausted she was. "Perhaps just for a little while," she said. Samuel helped her to her feet and guided her to the bedroom. It was a small space, barely large enough for the bed and a chest of drawers, but it was clean and the bed looked comfortable. Laura sat down on the edge of the mattress and looked up at her rescuer. "Thank you, Mr. Irwin," she said. "You saved my life." "Samuel," he said, "and you are welcome. Now rest." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Laura lay down on the bed, still wrapped in her blankets, and closed her eyes. Within moments, she was asleep. When she woke, the light coming through the small window told her it was morning, though the storm still raged outside. She sat up slowly, assessing her condition. Her body ached in a dozen places, and her feet were tender, but she seemed to have escaped without serious injury. She could hear movement in the main room, and the smell of coffee and bacon reached her nose. Laura stood and smoothed down the borrowed clothes as best she could. Her own clothing hung from pegs on the wall, apparently brought in and set to dry while she slept. She felt a flutter of embarrassment that Samuel had handled her things, but pushed it aside. The man had probably saved her life. Modesty seemed like a small concern under the circumstances. She opened the door and stepped into the main room. Samuel stood at the stove, tending to a pan of bacon. He glanced over his shoulder at her and nodded. "Morning," he said. "How do you feel?" "Better," Laura said. "Sore, but better." "Thank you for bringing in my clothes. They should be dry by tonight," Samuel said. "Coffee is hot if you want some." Laura poured herself a cup from the pot on the stove and sat down at the small table. She watched Samuel work, noting the easy competence with which he moved. He was clearly a man used to taking care of himself. The bacon was soon done, and he brought 2 plates to the table, each with bacon, fried potatoes, and thick slices of bread. "This looks wonderful," Laura said. "Thank you." They ate in silence for a few minutes. Laura was ravenous, and the food was simple but good. When she had taken the edge off her hunger, she looked across the table at her host. "Have you lived here long?" she asked. 3 years, Samuel said. "I bought the place from a man who was heading back east. It is not much, but it is mine." "It is a good home," Laura said. "You keep it well." Samuel glanced around the room as if seeing it through her eyes. "It serves its purpose. I run cattle mostly, some horses. It is a living." "Do you work alone?" Laura asked, then immediately regretted the question. It was too personal, too prying, but Samuel did not seem offended. "I have a hand who helps during roundup and branding, but otherwise, yes, I work alone. I prefer it that way." There was something in his tone that discouraged further questions, so Laura turned her attention back to her meal. After they had finished eating, Samuel cleared the plates and washed them in a basin. Laura stood to help, but he waved her off. "You need to take it easy today," he said. "You put your body through hell yesterday. Rest and stay warm." Laura wanted to argue, to insist that she could help, but she was still tired and her muscles ached. So she settled back into the chair by the fire and watched the storm rage outside. Samuel moved about the cabin, doing small tasks, mending a piece of tack, oiling his rifles. He was not talkative, but his presence was somehow comforting. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that made her feel safe. As the day wore on, Laura found herself studying him more closely. He was a handsome man, she thought, though he carried himself like someone who had known hardship. There was a sadness in his eyes that she recognized because she had seen it in her own mirror. He was older than her, probably by 5 or 6 years, with the kind of weathered look that came from years of outdoor work. His hands fascinated her. They were strong and capable, scarred from labor but gentle when he had helped her the night before. "May I ask you something?" Laura said suddenly. Samuel looked up from the bridle he was working on. "Ask." "Why did you come out to the barn last night, in the middle of a blizzard?" Samuel set down the bridle. "I always check on the animals during storms, make sure they have enough feed and water, that none of them are in distress. When I opened the door and saw a strange horse in the stall, I knew someone had taken shelter. I just did not expect to find." He paused. "Well, to find you. What did you expect to find? A drifter, maybe, or a cowhand caught in the storm, not a woman traveling alone." He met her eyes. "Why were you traveling alone, Mrs. Franklin? Do you not have family in Cheyenne?" Laura looked down at her hands. "My husband died 8 months ago. Fever. We had no children, and after he was gone, I had no reason to stay. My sister wrote to me, asking me to come stay with her and her husband. They have a homestead near the Montana border. I should have waited for better weather, I know, but I just wanted to leave. I wanted to be anywhere but that empty farm." Samuel nodded slowly. "I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Laura paused, then asked, "Are you married, Mr. Irwin?" "Samuel," he corrected. "And no, I was once. She died in childbirth. The baby, too. That was 5 years ago, back in Kansas." The pain in his voice was raw, even after all this time. Laura felt an unexpected kinship with this man. They were both wounded souls trying to survive in a harsh world. "I am sorry," she said softly. "That must have been terrible." "It was," Samuel said simply. He picked up the bridle again and returned to his work, clearly done with the conversation. They passed the rest of the day in companionable silence. Laura dozed by the fire, and Samuel continued with his tasks. When evening came, he made a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, and they ate together at the table. Afterward, Laura insisted on washing the dishes, and Samuel did not argue this time. As she worked, she was aware of him watching her, though he looked away whenever she glanced in his direction. When the dishes were done, Samuel banked the fire for the night and gestured toward the bedroom. "You should sleep," he said. "Tomorrow will be another long day of waiting out the storm." Laura hesitated. "Are you certain you will be comfortable out here?" "I will be fine," Samuel said. "I have slept in far worse places than in front of a warm fire." "Good night, Mrs. Franklin." "Laura," she said. "Please call me Laura." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing across his face. "Good night, Laura." She went to the bedroom and closed the door, then lay down on the bed still fully clothed. Outside, the wind howled and snow pelted against the window. But inside, she was warm and safe, and for the first time since Thomas had died, she did not feel quite so alone. The storm continued for 3 more days. During that time, Laura and Samuel fell into a routine. They would wake, share breakfast, and then occupy themselves with small tasks throughout the day. Samuel taught her how to mend leather, and she showed him how to make biscuits that were lighter and fluffier than his heavy attempts. They talked more, carefully at first, sharing small pieces of their past. Laura learned that Samuel had grown up in Missouri, the son of a farmer. He had fought in the Civil War, though he did not like to talk about it. Afterward, he had drifted west, working as a cowhand on various ranches before finally saving enough to buy his own place. His wife had been named Catherine, and he had loved her deeply. Her death had broken something in him, and he had moved to Wyoming to escape the memories. Laura shared her own story. She had been born in Philadelphia, the daughter of a shopkeeper. Her family had moved west when she was 15, settling in Cheyenne where her father had opened a general store. She had met Thomas Franklin when she was 19, and they had married a year later. He had been a kind man, if not an exciting one, and they had lived a quiet life on their small farm. His death had left her adrift, unsure of her place in the world. "Do you think you will stay with your sister?" Samuel asked one evening as they sat by the fire. Laura considered the question. "I do not know. Margaret has made it clear I am welcome, but I do not want to be a burden. Her husband is a good man, but they have their own struggles, adding another mouth to feed." She trailed off. "What would you do if you did not stay with them?" Samuel asked. "I do not know that either," Laura admitted. "I have a little money from selling the farm, but not enough to live on for long. I suppose I could find work somewhere, perhaps as a seamstress or a teacher. But there are not many opportunities for women alone out here." Samuel stared into the fire, his expression thoughtful. "No, there are not. This country is hard on everyone, but especially hard on women without protection." Laura felt a flash of irritation. "I am not helpless, Samuel. I can take care of myself." "I did not say you were helpless," Samuel said, looking at her. "I said the country is hard on you. That is not the same thing. You are clearly capable. You survived that storm, did you not?" "But capability does not change the fact that this world is set up to make things difficult for women on their own." Laura nodded, her irritation fading. "You are right. I am sorry. I am just tired of being seen as something weak, something that needs to be managed." "I do not see you that way," Samuel said quietly. Their eyes met across the fire, and something shifted in the air between them. Laura felt her breath catch. In the firelight, Samuel's face was half in shadow, but his eyes were bright and intense. She realized with a start that she found him attractive. More than that, she enjoyed his company. Over the past few days, she had come to appreciate his quiet strength, his dry humor, his kindness, and that terrified her. She looked away, her heart pounding. "I should go to bed," she said, standing quickly. Good night. Good night, Laura, Samuel said, and she could hear the confusion in his voice. She fled to the bedroom and closed the door, leaning against it as she tried to calm her racing heart. This was foolishness. She had known this man for only a handful of days. She was still in mourning for Thomas. She had no business feeling attraction to anyone, let alone a near stranger. But even as she told herself this, she knew it was not entirely true. Yes, she had loved Thomas, but it had been a comfortable, companionate love. What she felt when she looked at Samuel was something different, something that made her feel alive in a way she had not felt in years. She climbed into bed and pulled the blankets over her head, as if she could hide from her own feelings. Outside, the storm finally began to ease. By the next morning, the snow had stopped falling and the wind had died down. The world outside was buried under several feet of white, but the sun shone weakly through the clouds. Samuel went out early to check on the animals and to begin the work of digging out. Laura helped as best she could, bringing him hot coffee and food and clearing snow from the paths around the house. As they worked side by side, Laura was acutely aware of Samuel's presence. Every time their hands brushed as they passed tools back and forth, she felt a jolt of electricity. She told herself to stop being ridiculous, but her traitorous heart would not listen. The trail should be passable in a day or two, Samuel said as they took a break for lunch. Once I can get you to the main road, you should be able to find your way north to your sister's place. Or you could head back to Cheyenne if you prefer. Laura felt an unexpected pang at the thought of leaving. That soon? Samuel looked at her, and she thought she saw something like regret in his eyes. Yes, that soon. I know you are anxious to move on, but the truth was, she was not anxious. She had been happier in the past few days, trapped in this small cabin with Samuel than she had been in months. But she could not tell him that. It would be too forward, too inappropriate. Yes, she said instead. My sister will be worried about me. Samuel nodded and returned to his work, but Laura thought she detected a slump in his shoulders that had not been there before. That evening, after dinner, Samuel pulled out a worn deck of cards and asked if she knew how to play poker. Laura admitted she did not, and he spent the next hour teaching her the rules. They played for dried beans as tokens, and Laura found herself laughing as she won hand after hand through sheer beginner's luck. Samuel pretended to be disgruntled, but she could see the smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. You are a card shark, Laura Franklin, he said. I should never have taught you this game. I think you are just a poor player, she teased back, feeling bold. Samuel's smile widened, and for a moment he looked years younger. Is that so? Well, we will see about that. They played until late into the night, and when Laura finally went to bed, she realized with a start that she had not thought about Thomas once all evening. The guilt came rushing back, and she lay awake for a long time, wrestling with her emotions. The next day, Samuel announced that he would ride out to check the trail. He saddled one of his horses and set off early, telling Laura he would be back by midday. While he was gone, Laura explored the cabin more thoroughly than she had before. She found herself drawn to the shelf of books, and she pulled down a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets. As she flipped through the pages, a piece of paper fell out. It was a letter, written in a feminine hand. Laura knew she should not read it, but curiosity got the better of her. The letter was from Samuel's late wife, Catherine, written shortly before their wedding. It spoke of her love for him, her excitement about their future together, her dreams of the children they would have and the life they would build. Laura folded the letter carefully and replaced it in the book, tears stinging her eyes. The pain Samuel must have felt, losing all those dreams. She understood now why he kept himself so isolated, why he had never remarried. He was still in love with a ghost when Samuel returned. His expression was grim. "The trail is still too dangerous," he said. "There are drifts higher than a horse's head in places. It will be at least another few days before I can safely guide you out of here." Laura should have been disappointed, but instead she felt a secret thrill of relief. "Then I suppose we are stuck with each other a while longer," she said, trying to keep her tone light. "I suppose so," Samuel said, and was it her imagination, or did he look pleased? Over the next few days, the barriers between them continued to crumble. They talked more freely, sharing not just facts about their past but also their hopes and fears. Samuel admitted that he was lonely, that he had chosen isolation because it was easier than risking his heart again. Laura confessed that her marriage to Thomas, while comfortable, had lacked passion, and that she had always wondered what it would be like to feel truly desired by a man. "You were not happy?" Samuel asked, surprised. "I was not unhappy," Laura clarified. "Thomas was a good man, but he married me because it was practical, and I married him because it was expected. We were fond of each other, but we were never in love. Not really." Samuel studied her face in the firelight. "That must have been hard, living a half-life like that." "I did not know it was a half-life until now," Laura said quietly. Then, realizing what she had revealed, she felt her face flush. "I know what you mean," Samuel said, his voice low. He reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. "Laura, But whatever he was about to say was interrupted by a loud crash from outside. Samuel jumped to his feet, immediately alert. "Stay here," he said, reaching for one of his rifles. "What is it?" Laura asked, her heart racing. "I do not know. Could be a branch falling under the weight of the snow. Could be something else." He moved to the window and peered out into the darkness. "I need to check the barn, make sure the animals are all right." "I will come with you," Laura said, standing. "No," Samuel said firmly. "If there is trouble, I need to know you are safe in here. Bar the door behind me and do not open it for anyone but me." Before Laura could argue, he was out the door and into the night. She quickly barred the door as instructed, then went to the window to watch. She could see Samuel's silhouette moving through the snow toward the barn, the rifle ready in his hands. Her heart pounded in her chest. What if something happened to him? What if there were wolves, or worse, men with ill intent? The minutes crawled by. Laura pressed her face to the cold glass, straining to see. Finally, Samuel emerged from the barn and trudged back to the house. She unbarred the door and flung it open. "What was it?" she asked. "A pine branch broke under the snow and fell on the roof of the barn," Samuel said, stomping snow from his boots. "Startled the horses, but no real damage done." He looked at her worried face and his expression softened. "I am fine, Laura. Everything is fine." But Laura's fear had been real, and now that the danger had passed, it transformed into something else. Before she could think better of it, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Samuel, pressing her face against his chest. For a moment he stood frozen, and Laura thought she had made a terrible mistake. But then his arms came around her, holding her close. "I was so scared," she whispered against his shirt. "When you went out there, I was so scared something would happen to you." "Nothing is going to happen to me," Samuel said, his voice rumbling in his chest. "I have been handling trouble out here for years." Laura pulled back just enough to look up at him. "That does not mean I cannot worry about you." They stood there, inches apart, and the air between them felt charged with electricity. Samuel's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "Laura," he said, her name a question and a prayer. "Yes," she answered, though he had not asked anything. He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she did not want to pull away. When his lips met hers, it was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might break. But Laura had no intention of breaking. She kissed him back with all the longing she had been suppressing for days. her fingers tangling in his hair. Samuel made a sound low in his throat and deepened the kiss, pulling her closer. Laura felt as if she was on fire, every nerve in her body alive and singing. This was what she had been missing, this passion, this connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I should not have done that," he said, but he did not sound sorry. "I wanted you to," Laura said. "I have wanted you to for days." Samuel pulled back to look at her, his dark eyes searching her face. "Laura, you are a widow, I am. We are both still grieving. This could be a mistake. Or it could be the best thing that has happened to either of us in years," Laura countered. "Samuel, I know this is sudden. I know we have only known each other a short time, but I feel something when I am with you that I have never felt before. Is that not worth taking a chance on?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "What I feel for you," he said finally, "it scares me. When Catherine died, I swore I would never open myself up to that kind of pain again. But then you stumbled into my barn in the middle of a blizzard, and everything I thought I knew got turned upside down. I am scared too," Laura admitted. "But I am more scared of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been." Samuel smiled, the first real, unguarded smile she had seen from him. "You are a brave woman, Laura Franklin." "I am a foolish woman," Laura corrected. "But sometimes being foolish is the right choice." He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. When they finally broke apart, Samuel took her hand and led her to the bedroom. What passed between them that night was tender and passionate, a joining of two lonely souls who had found each other against all odds. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Laura felt a peace she had not known was possible. "What happens now?" she asked, tracing patterns on Samuel's chest. "Now," Samuel said, "we figure out how to make this work, if you want to, that is." "I want to," Laura said without hesitation. "But Samuel, I am supposed to be going to my sister's place. She is expecting me." "Then we will get you to your sister's place," Samuel said. "And I will court you properly. I will ride up on Sundays and sit in her parlor and make awkward conversation with her husband. And when enough time has passed that it is respectable, I will ask you to marry me." Laura laughed. "You have this all planned out, do you?" "I am making it up as I go," Samuel admitted. "But the important part, the part about asking you to marry me, that is not negotiable. I have found you, Laura, and I am not letting you go." "Good," Laura said, snuggling closer. "Because I am not going anywhere." They spent the rest of the night talking and making plans. In the morning, Samuel declared that the trail was finally clear enough for travel. He would ride with Laura to the main road and point her in the right direction to reach her sister's homestead. From there, he would return home and give her a week to settle in before he came calling. Laura packed her belongings, which had dried completely by now, and changed back into her own clothes. She was sad to leave Samuel's shirt and trousers behind, as they reminded her of the strange, wonderful days she had spent in this cabin. But she carefully folded them and left them on the bed. When she emerged, Samuel had both horses saddled and ready. He had packed food for her journey, enough to last several days if needed, and drawn a map showing the route she should take. As they led the horses outside into the bright winter morning, Laura looked back at the cabin and barn that had been her refuge. "Thank you," she said to Samuel. "For everything." "Thank you," he replied, "for crashing into my life and reminding me what it feels like to be alive." They rode together for several hours, following a path that Samuel had broken through the deep snow. The world was breathtakingly beautiful, all pristine white and brilliant blue sky. When they finally reached the main road, Samuel drew his horse alongside hers. "You head north from here," he said, pointing up the road. Stay on this trail and you should reach the settlement of Red Lodge in 2 days, maybe 3 depending on the conditions. Your sister's homestead should be about 10 miles west of there. Ask in town and someone will be able to direct you." "I will find it," Laura said. Then daringly she leaned over and kissed him. "1 week, you had better come calling, Samuel Irwin." "Wild horses could not keep me away," Samuel said. He caught her hand and pressed it to his lips. "Be safe, Laura. You too." With a final look, Laura urged her mare forward. She rode for several minutes before turning in her saddle to look back. Samuel still sat on his horse, watching her. He raised a hand in farewell, and she returned the gesture. Then she turned back to the road ahead and rode on. The journey to Red Lodge took 3 days, as Samuel had predicted. The going was slow, with drifts to navigate around and the occasional need to shelter from brief snow squalls. But Laura's mare was rested and well fed, and Laura herself felt stronger than she had in months. She had something to look forward to now, something to hope for. When she finally rode into Red Lodge, it was late afternoon. The settlement was small, just a handful of buildings clustered around a crossroads. She stopped at the general store and asked for directions to the Franklin homestead, the name her sister now went by through marriage. The storekeeper, a jovial man with a thick beard, knew exactly where it was. "Jim and Margaret Franklin, sure I know them," he said. "Good folks. You ride west out of town on the old mining road about 10 miles. You will see a big red barn on the left side of the road. That is their place." Laura thanked him and set off immediately, not wanting to waste any more time. The sun was setting by the time she found the red barn, and beyond it, a sturdy log house with smoke rising from the chimney. She rode into the yard, and before she could dismount, the front door flew open and her sister Margaret came running out. "Laura! Oh my God, Laura!" Margaret pulled her down from the horse and embraced her fiercely. "We were so worried. We expected you weeks ago. We thought you had changed your mind, or worse, that something terrible had happened." "Something almost did happen," Laura admitted as her brother-in-law Jim came out to join them. "I got caught in that big storm. If I had not found shelter, I would have frozen to death." Come inside," Margaret insisted, ushering her toward the house. Jim took charge of the mare, leading her to the barn. "You must be exhausted. Let me make you some tea and you can tell us everything." Over the next few hours, Laura told them an edited version of her adventure. She mentioned finding Samuel's ranch and taking shelter, and that he had been kind enough to let her stay until the storm passed. She did not mention the kisses, or the night they had spent together, or the fact that she was already half in love with the man. That would come later when the time was right. Margaret's homestead was comfortable and welcoming. She and Jim had been married for 3 years and had a daughter, a cherubic 2-year-old named Lucy. They made Laura feel at home immediately, giving her a small room of her own and including her in their daily routines. Margaret was delighted to have her sister with her, and the 2 women spent long hours catching up on all the years they had been apart. But as the week wore on, Laura found herself growing anxious. Would Samuel really come? Had she imagined the connection between them? What if he had changed his mind? On the 7th day after her arrival, exactly 1 week after they had parted at the road, there was a knock at the door. Laura, who had been helping Margaret with the bread-making, froze. Jim went to answer it, and she heard a familiar, deep voice asking if Mrs. Laura Franklin was present. "I will get her," Jim said, confusion evident in his tone. He came into the kitchen. "Laura, there is a man here to see you. Says his name is Samuel Irwin." Margaret's eyes went wide, but Laura ignored her sister's curious look. She quickly washed the flour from her hands and went to the door. Samuel stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking nervous. He had clearly made an effort to clean up, his hair neatly combed and his best shirt pressed, When he saw Laura, his whole face lit up. "Hello, Laura," he said. "Hello, Samuel," she replied, unable to keep the smile from her face. "You came. I said I would." Behind her, Laura heard Margaret whisper to Jim, "Who is this man?" But she did not care about the explanations that would need to be made. All she cared about was that Samuel had kept his promise. "Would you like to come in?" Laura asked. "I should introduce you properly to my sister and her husband." "I would like that very much," Samuel said. The afternoon that followed was both wonderful and awkward. Samuel sat stiffly in the parlor, balancing a teacup on his knee and making polite conversation with Jim while Margaret shot Laura significant looks. But gradually, as the conversation went on, everyone began to relax. Jim, it turned out, had worked cattle before settling down to farm, and he and Samuel discovered they had some acquaintances in common. Margaret, for her part, seemed to warm to Samuel once she saw how he looked at Laura. When Samuel finally took his leave, promising to return the following Sunday, Margaret practically pounced on Laura the moment the door closed. "All right, explain," she demanded. "Who is that man and what happened between you two?" Laura took a deep breath and told her sister everything. Margaret listened with wide eyes, occasionally gasping or exclaiming. When Laura finished, Margaret sat back in her chair. "So you are in love with him," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Laura admitted. "I know it is fast and I know it probably seems foolish, but yes, I am in love with him." Margaret smiled. "It does not seem foolish at all. He is clearly a good man, and Laura, the way he looks at you. I have never seen a man look at a woman the way he looks at you." "Really?" Laura asked, needing the reassurance. "Really," Margaret confirmed. "And you look at him the same way." "If you are happy, then I am happy for you." Over the following months, Samuel became a regular visitor to the Franklin homestead. He would ride up every Sunday without fail, no matter the weather, and spend the day with Laura and her family. Jim came to respect him, and even little Lucy took a liking to him, climbing on his lap and demanding stories. As winter gave way to spring, Samuel began to court Laura in earnest. He brought her small gifts, wildflowers picked from the high meadows, a book of poetry he thought she would enjoy. They would take long walks together, always properly chaperoned by Margaret, and talk for hours about everything and nothing. In May, 6 months after that fateful blizzard, Samuel asked Jim's permission to marry Laura. Jim gave his blessing without hesitation. That evening, Samuel took Laura for a walk down by the creek that ran through the property. The cottonwoods were in full leaf, and the air was sweet with the scent of spring. "Laura Franklin," Samuel said, taking both her hands in his. "I came out here today planning to make a pretty speech, to tell you all the reasons why I love you and why I want to spend the rest of my life with you. But now that the moment is here, all I can think is that I love you. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Laura said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Samuel, I will marry you." He pulled out a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother and slipped it onto her finger. Then he kissed her, and Laura felt as if her heart might burst from happiness. They were married in June in a small ceremony at the church in Red Lodge. Margaret stood up as Laura's attendant, and Jim served as Samuel's witness. A handful of their neighbors attended, curious to meet Samuel and to celebrate with the couple. After the ceremony, everyone returned to the Franklin homestead for a celebration meal that Margaret had spent days preparing. As the sun set and the guests began to depart, Samuel lifted Laura onto his horse and climbed up behind her. They were riding back to his ranch, which would now be her ranch too, her home. As they rode through the gathering twilight, Laura leaned back against Samuel's chest and felt completely content. "Happy?" Samuel asked, his arms secure around her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Laura answered truthfully. They reached the ranch well after dark, but the moon was full and bright, lighting their way. Samuel helped Laura down from the horse and carried her over the threshold, a gesture that made her laugh with delight. Inside, the cabin was exactly as she remembered it, but somehow it looked different now. It looked like home. Over the following days and weeks, Laura settled into her new life as Mrs. Samuel Irwin. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and hard work, the satisfaction of caring for the animals and watching the land. Samuel was a patient teacher, showing her how to handle the cattle, how to mend fences, how to read the weather in the clouds. But it was not all work. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's company. Samuel had a dry wit that made Laura laugh, and she discovered that she had a gift for drawing him out of his occasional dark moods. They were partners in the truest sense, supporting and complimenting each other. As summer turned to fall, Laura began to suspect that she was pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Samuel, choosing a quiet evening after dinner to share the news. She watched his face carefully as she told him, worried about how he would react given what had happened with Catherine. For a long moment, Samuel said nothing. Then he stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling before her chair. He laid his hand gently on her still flat stomach and looked up at her with tears in his eyes. "A baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Laura asked, needing to hear him say it. "I am terrified," Samuel admitted. "But yes, I am happy. So very happy." They held each other for a long time, both overcome with emotion. Later, as they lay in bed, Samuel voiced his fears. "What if something goes wrong? What if I lose you like I lost Catherine?" "You are not going to lose me," Laura said firmly. "I am strong and healthy, and we will find a good midwife to help with the birth. Everything is going to be fine." "You cannot know that," Samuel said. "No, I cannot," Laura agreed, "but I can have faith. And I can promise you that I will fight with everything I have to come back to you and to our child. You have given me so much, Samuel. You have given me love and a home and a purpose. I am not leaving you. Not now, not ever." Samuel pulled her close and held her through the night, and Laura could feel him slowly releasing his fear and accepting the hope she offered. As winter approached again, Laura's pregnancy became more evident. She continued to work as much as she was able, though Samuel fussed over her constantly, trying to get her to rest. Margaret visited often, excited to have a niece or nephew on the way, and she brought supplies and advice based on her own experience with Lucy. The baby was due in early March, and as the time drew near, Samuel became increasingly anxious. He had arranged for the midwife from Red Lodge to come stay at the ranch a week before the baby was due, just to be safe. Laura tried to reassure him, but she understood his fear. She was a little frightened herself, though she tried not to show it. On a cold morning in early March, Laura woke to the first contractions. She woke Samuel, who immediately went into a panic, rushing around trying to fetch things that Laura did not need yet. She managed to calm him down enough to send him for the midwife, who had been staying with a neighbor nearby. By the time they returned, Laura's contractions were coming regularly. The labor was long and difficult. Laura had not anticipated just how much it would hurt, and there were moments when she wondered if she had been foolish to be so confident. But every time she felt herself weakening, she would look at Samuel's face, see the love and fear there, and she would find new strength. Finally, as the sun was setting, Laura gave one final push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby crying. The midwife cleaned the infant quickly and wrapped it in a soft blanket before placing it in Laura's arms. "It is a boy," she announced with a smile. Laura looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and his shock of dark hair, and fell instantly in love. Samuel leaned over them both, his own face wet with tears. "He is perfect," Samuel whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Laura asked. They had discussed names, of course, but had not been able to agree. Now, looking at their son, Samuel said, "What about Thomas? After your late husband. He may not have been the love of your life, but he was a good man and he deserves to be remembered." Laura felt tears spring to her eyes at Samuel's generosity. "Thomas Samuel Irwin," she said. "It is perfect." Little Thomas thrived, growing into a healthy, happy baby. He had his father's dark eyes and his mother's smile, and he was the light of both their lives. Samuel, who had been so afraid, turned out to be a wonderful father. He was patient and gentle, and Laura often found him simply standing over the baby's cradle, watching him sleep with a look of wonder on his face. As Thomas grew from a baby to a toddler and then to a young boy, Laura and Samuel's love deepened and matured. They had their disagreements, of course, as all couples do, but they had learned how to talk through their problems and support each other. The ranch prospered under their joint management, and they were able to expand, buying more cattle and hiring a permanent ranch hand to help with the work. When Thomas was 3, Laura became pregnant again. This time, Samuel was less fearful, though still protective. Their second child was a girl they named Catherine Margaret, after Samuel's late wife and Laura's sister. Samuel held his daughter and wept, telling Laura that he felt as if all the broken pieces of his heart had finally been put back together. 2 years after Catherine was born, they had another son, whom they named James after Laura's father, who had passed away the previous winter. And 3 years after that came another daughter, Emily, whose sunny disposition made everyone around her smile. Life on the ranch was full and busy, with 4 children underfoot and always work to be done. But it was also filled with love and laughter. Laura often thought back to that terrible night when she had stumbled into Samuel's barn, half frozen and certain she was going to die. If someone had told her then that she would find such happiness, such completeness, she would never have believed them. On a warm summer evening, when Thomas was 12 and little Emily was 5, the family sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The children were playing a game in the yard, their shouts and laughter drifting on the breeze. Samuel sat in his rocking chair and Laura sat in hers, their hands linked between them. "You ever think about that night?" Laura asked. "The night I stumbled into your life?" "Every day," Samuel said. "Best storm that ever blew through Wyoming," Laura laughed. "I could have died." "But you did not," Samuel said, raising her hand to his lips. "You lived, and you gave me a reason to live again, too. I was just existing before you came along, Laura. You taught me how to be alive again." "We taught each other," Laura corrected. "I was just as lost as you were, maybe more so. You gave me a home and a purpose and a love I did not know was possible." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children play. Laura thought about all the years that had passed, all the joys and sorrows they had shared. She thought about Thomas Franklin, her first husband, and she sent up a silent thank you to him for being a good man, even if they had not been in love. She thought about Catherine, Samuel's first wife, and thanked her too for loving Samuel and teaching him how to be the man he was. But mostly she thought about the present, about the life they had built together. 4 beautiful children, a thriving ranch, a love that had only grown stronger with time. This was more than she had ever dreamed possible. Thomas, their eldest, came running up to the porch. At 12, he was already showing signs of becoming a fine young man, tall and serious like his father but with Laura's quick smile. "Papa, can we sleep out under the stars tonight?" he asked. "Please?" Samuel looked at Laura, who nodded. "All right," he said. "But you are in charge of your younger siblings. Make sure Catherine does not wander off and keep James from getting into mischief." "I will, Papa," Thomas promised, running off to tell the others the good news. "He is so much like you," Laura said, watching her son go. "And Catherine is just like you," Samuel replied, "stubborn and independent and beautiful." "I am not sure stubborn is a compliment," Laura said dryly. "It is when it is directed in the right way," Samuel said. "Your stubbornness has kept this family going through some hard times." It was true. There had been hard times over the years, summers of drought and winters of deep snow. There had been losses too, calves born dead, crops that failed, friends and neighbors who had given up and moved on. But through it all, Laura and Samuel had held firm, supporting each other and their growing family. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the children spread out blankets in the yard and settled down for their night of camping. Samuel and Laura remained on the porch, unwilling to break the spell of the evening. Eventually, Samuel stood and pulled Laura to her feet, drawing her into his arms. "Dance with me," he said. "There is no music," Laura pointed out. "We do not need music." So they swayed together on the porch, moving to a rhythm only they could hear. Laura rested her head on Samuel's chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. This was home, she thought. Not the ranch, not the house, but this. Being in Samuel's arms, surrounded by the children they had created together, watching the stars come out over the Wyoming high country. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Samuel said. "More than words can say." They stood there for a long time, holding each other as the night deepened around them. Out in the yard, their children chattered and giggled, excited by their adventure. Inside the house, the lamps glowed warm and welcoming. And up above, the stars wheeled across the vast expanse of sky, eternal and unchanging. Laura thought about the girl she had been, lost and alone in a blizzard, certain her life was over. And she thought about the woman she had become, strong and confident and loved beyond measure. The journey from one to the other had been unexpected and sometimes frightening, but she would not change a single moment of it, because every step had led her here, to this porch, to this man, to this life. And it was more than enough. It was everything. Years continued to pass in that same rhythm of joy and work and love. The children grew, each one developing their own personality and dreams. Thomas proved to be a natural rancher, following in Samuel's footsteps with an enthusiasm that filled his father with pride. Catherine, true to her namesake and her mother's influence, was independent and bright, with a passion for books and learning that led her to dreams of becoming a teacher. James was the adventurous one, always looking beyond the horizon and talking about seeing the wider world. And Emily, the baby, was pure sunshine, bringing light and laughter to even the hardest days. She had a gift with animals that surpassed even Samuel's, able to calm the most skittish horse or frightened calf with just her presence. As the children grew into young adults, the ranch house that had once seemed plenty big began to feel crowded. Samuel and Thomas, working together, built an addition onto the house, adding bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. Margaret and Jim came to help with the work, bringing Lucy, who was now a young woman herself and engaged to be married to a rancher's son from Red Lodge. During the building, as the families worked side by side, Laura and Margaret found a quiet moment together. They sat on the porch steps, watching their menfolk hoist beams and hammer nails. "Look at us," Margaret said with a smile. "Who would have thought when we were girls in Philadelphia that we would end up here, ranchers' wives in the Wyoming wilderness?" "I certainly never imagined it," Laura admitted, "but I would not change it for anything. "You are happy," Margaret observed. "Truly happy. I can see it in your eyes." "I am," Laura confirmed. "There are hard days, of course. The work is never ending, and there are times when I am so tired I could cry. But yes, I am happy. Samuel is my best friend and my great love, and our children are healthy and growing. What more could I ask for?" Margaret squeezed her hand. "I am so glad you found him, or that he found you. However it happened, I am grateful. You deserve this happiness, Laura." By the time Thomas turned 18, he was running much of the ranch alongside his father. He had fallen in love with a neighbor's daughter, a sweet girl named Annie, and Samuel and Laura could see a wedding in the not-too-distant future. Catherine, at 16, had convinced her parents to let her go to the territorial capital for advanced schooling, with plans to return and start a school in Red Lodge. James, at 14, was still talking about adventures, but Samuel was patient with him, knowing that some people needed to wander before they could settle. And Emily, at 11, spent most of her free time in the barn with the animals, already declaring that she wanted to breed horses when she grew up. On the evening of Samuel and Laura's 20th wedding anniversary, the family gathered for a special dinner. The children had planned it in secret, decorating the house and preparing all of their parents' favorite foods. When Samuel and Laura came in from the day's work, they were greeted with shouts of surprise, and a table laden with enough food for an army. "What is all this?" Laura asked, though she could not keep the smile from her face. "It is your anniversary," Catherine said, coming forward to embrace her mother. 20 years. That is worth celebrating. We wanted to do something special," Thomas added, "to thank you both for everything you have done for us." Laura felt tears prick her eyes as she looked around at her family, at these 4 incredible human beings that she and Samuel had brought into the world and raised together. "You did not need to do all this," she said. "Yes, we did," Emily insisted, grabbing her mother's hand. "Come on, the food is getting cold." They sat down to dinner, and the conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and teasing and the comfortable give and take of a family who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. After the meal, James stood up and cleared his throat. "We have something else for you," he said, suddenly shy. We wrote something, all of us together. Catherine did most of the actual writing because her handwriting is the best, but we all contributed." Catherine pulled out a piece of paper and began to read. It was a letter, expressing their gratitude and love for their parents. It spoke of lessons learned and values instilled. It talked about the example Samuel and Laura had set, showing their children what true love and partnership looked like. By the time Catherine finished reading, there was not a dry eye at the table. Samuel stood and pulled each of his children into a tight embrace. "You 4 are the best thing I have ever done with my life," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am so proud of all of you." Laura simply held out her arms, and all 4 children crowded in for a group embrace, just like they used to do when they were small. She kissed each head she could reach and whispered, "I love you all so much." Later that night, after the children had finally gone to bed and the kitchen had been cleaned, Samuel led Laura outside. The night was clear and mild, perfect for early June. He took her hand and led her away from the house, out to the barn where their story had begun. "Do you remember?" he asked as they stood in the doorway, looking at the stalls where Laura's mare had sheltered that long-ago night. "I remember every moment," Laura said. "I was so cold, so scared. I thought I was going to die, and then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I had not even known I was praying." "I saw you lying in that hay," Samuel said, "and even half frozen and terrified, you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I know it sounds foolish, but I think I started falling in love with you that very first moment." You looked up at me with those weary eyes, and something in my chest just cracked wide open. Beauty in my weary eyes, Laura repeated softly. I did not feel beautiful. I felt broken and lost. But you were not broken, Samuel said. You were just tired, and maybe a little bit lost. But you were still whole, still strong. I saw that in you from the beginning. Laura turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. We saved each other, she said. That is what happened that night. I saved you from your loneliness, and you saved me from mine. And then we built something together that was greater than either of us alone. Samuel pulled her close and kissed her, and it was like the first time and every time in between. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. Here is to 20 more years, he said. 20 more at least, Laura agreed. Maybe 40 if we are lucky. They stood there in the barn doorway for a long time, holding each other and watching the stars. The night sounds of the ranch surrounded them, horses shifting in their stalls, cattle lowing softly in the distance, the wind rustling through the cottonwoods. It was the sound of home, of life, of everything they had built together. Eventually, they made their way back to the house, walking hand in hand like young lovers instead of an old married couple. Inside, the lamp still burned in the kitchen, and everything was clean and orderly, ready for the next day's work. They checked on the children, all 4 sound asleep in their beds, then retired to their own room. As Laura lay in bed with Samuel's arms around her, she thought about the path that had brought her here. From Philadelphia to Cheyenne, from her marriage to Thomas to his death, from that desperate ride through the blizzard to the moment Samuel had found her in his barn. Every step had been necessary. Every hardship had taught her something. Every loss had prepared her for the love she had found. She thought about the widow she had been, weary and uncertain, with no idea what the future held. And she compared that woman to the one she was now, strong and confident, surrounded by love. The journey had transformed her, but she realized now that Samuel had seen the seeds of that transformation even in her darkest moment. He had seen beauty in her weary eyes when she could not see it herself. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Samuel murmured, already half asleep. "For seeing me," Laura said, "for seeing who I could be and loving me anyway." Samuel's arms tightened around her. "Always," he said. "I will always see you and I will always love you." Laura closed her eyes and let sleep take her, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years continued their march, bringing changes both great and small. Thomas married his Annie in a beautiful ceremony at the church in Red Lodge, and within a year, they presented Samuel and Laura with their first grandchild, a boy they named Samuel James after his grandfather and uncle. The baby was healthy and loud, and Samuel was utterly besotted with him from the first moment. "I had forgotten how small they are," he said, cradling the infant in his work-roughened hands with surprising gentleness. "How perfect!" Laura watched her husband with their grandchild and felt her heart swell. This was a blessing she had not anticipated, the joy of seeing Samuel as a grandfather, seeing the cycle of life continue. Thomas and Annie built a small house on the ranch property, planning to take over more and more of the operation as Samuel got older. Catherine finished her schooling and returned to open a small school in Red Lodge, just as she had planned. She taught children of all ages, from primer readers to young adults preparing for their own futures. She remained unmarried, claiming she was too busy with her students to think about such things, but Laura suspected there was more to the story. Still, Catherine seemed happy, and that was what mattered. James, as predicted, left home at 18 to see the world. He worked on cattle drives and mining operations, traveled as far as California and even down to Mexico. He wrote letters home regularly, filled with descriptions of the places he had seen and the people he had met. Samuel worried about him, but Laura reminded him that James needed to find his own path. "He will come home when he is ready," she said. "Just like you came to Wyoming to find yourself. Sometimes people need to wander before they can settle." Emily, true to her word, began breeding horses on the ranch. She had an eye for good bloodlines and a gift for training that was remarkable. By the time she was 20, she had developed a reputation throughout the territory for producing quality stock. She too showed no interest in marriage, claiming that horses were better company than most men. "You and Papa are the exception," she told Laura once. "Most men would not let a woman run a business like this. They would want to take over or tell me what to do. I am better off on my own." Laura could not argue with that logic, even if part of her hoped that Emily might someday find a man who would appreciate her independence rather than trying to quash it. As Samuel and Laura moved into their 50s, they gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, letting Thomas and Annie take over more of the responsibility. It was a relief in some ways to have fewer physical demands on their aging bodies, but it was also strange to be less central to the operation they had built. "I feel useless," Samuel admitted one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained for decades. "You are not useless," Laura said firmly. "You are passing on your legacy to the next generation. That is important work too. Besides, Thomas still asks for your advice on everything important." "That is true," Samuel conceded, "and I suppose it is nice to be able to sleep past dawn occasionally." Laura laughed. "You have not slept past dawn since the day I met you, and we both know you never will." "Fair point," Samuel said with a grin. They were blessed with more grandchildren over the years. Thomas and Annie had 3 more children, 2 girls and another boy. Catherine surprised everyone by eventually marrying a widower with 2 children of his own, a kind man who supported her teaching and even helped at the school. James returned home at 25 with a wife he had met in California, a spirited woman named Rose who fit right into the family. They settled on a piece of land adjacent to the ranch and started raising beef cattle. Only Emily remained unmarried, perfectly content with her horses and her independence. She built a small cabin near the main house and lived there with a succession of dogs and cats, all rescues that she could not bear to turn away. On Samuel and Laura's 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were now 8 grandchildren, ranging in age from 15 to infant, and the house was filled with noise and chaos and laughter. Samuel and Laura sat at the head of the table, looking around at the family they had created, and both felt overwhelmed with gratitude. After dinner, Thomas stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. "You have shown all of us what love looks like, what commitment means, what it takes to build a life together. You have worked hard, loved deeply, and created a legacy that will last for generations. We are all here because of the choices you made, because you found each other on a snowy night 30 years ago and decided to take a chance on love. Thank you for everything. We love you." "Hear, hear," the family chorused, raising their glasses. Laura wiped away tears and reached for Samuel's hand. He squeezed it gently, and she knew he was feeling the same overwhelming emotion. They had done this. Together, they had built this family, this life, this love. As the evening wore on and the grandchildren were put to bed, and the adult children lingered over coffee and conversation, Samuel and Laura slipped away to their room. They were tired, but it was a good tired, the satisfaction of a life well lived. 30 years, Laura said as she brushed out her hair, silver now instead of the dark brown it had once been. "Where did the time go?" "I do not know," Samuel said, watching her from the bed. His own hair was more gray than dark now, and there were deep lines around his eyes and mouth. "But I would not trade a single moment of it." Laura put down her brush and climbed into bed beside him. They lay facing each other, just as they had done countless nights over the past 3 decades. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Laura asked. "When you found me in the barn, I said a lot of things," Samuel replied. "Which part?" "You said Jesus Christ," Laura said with a smile. "Those were your first words to me," Samuel laughed. "I suppose they were. You scared the hell out of me, lying there half frozen. I thought you were dead at first. And then you saved me," Laura said. "You carried me inside and got me warm and made me soup. You saved my life, Samuel." "And you saved mine," Samuel said. "Maybe not that first night, but in all the days and years that followed. You taught me how to live again, Laura, how to love again. You gave me a reason to hope." "We did that for each other," Laura said. "And we created all of this." She gestured vaguely toward the rest of the house, toward the family sleeping under their roof and in the houses nearby. "This is our legacy. Not just the ranch, but the love we have built and shared." "It is a good legacy," Samuel agreed. He reached out and cupped her face, his thumb tracing the lines that time had etched there. "You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen." "Even with all these wrinkles?" Laura asked. "Especially with the wrinkles," Samuel said. "They show a life lived fully, joys celebrated and sorrows survived. They are beautiful because they are part of you." Laura kissed him then, a slow, sweet kiss that held 30 years of love and trust and partnership. When they finally settled down to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Laura thought about that frightened widow who had stumbled into Samuel's barn so long ago. She wished she could go back and tell that woman what waited for her, the love and joy and family that would fill her life. But perhaps it was better that she had not known. The surprise of it, the unexpected gift of finding love when she thought her life was over, had made it all the sweeter. As Samuel's breathing deepened into sleep, Laura lay awake a little longer, thinking about everything they had built together and everything they had yet to experience. There would be more grandchildren, she was sure. Perhaps even great-grandchildren if they were blessed with long lives. There would be more challenges too, health issues and losses and the inevitable march of time. But they would face it all together, just as they had faced everything else. And that, Laura thought as she finally drifted off to sleep, was all she needed. As long as she had Samuel by her side, she could face anything. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and Samuel and Laura moved deeper into their 60s. Their bodies slowed, joints aching on cold mornings and muscles protesting after too much work. But their minds remained sharp, and their love for each other only deepened with time. Samuel developed a cough that winter that worried Laura, though he insisted it was nothing. She made him see the doctor in Red Lodge, who prescribed rest and a tonic. The cough eventually went away, but the scare reminded them both that their time was not infinite. They began to talk about things they had been putting off, making sure their affairs were in order and their wishes known to their children. It was a sobering time, but also strangely peaceful. They had lived good lives, built something lasting. If their time came tomorrow, they could face it without regrets, but apparently fate was not done with them yet. Samuel recovered fully from his cough, and Laura remained healthy and active despite her advancing years. They continued their routines, helping out around the ranch when they could and spending time with their growing family. The grandchildren loved coming to visit them, begging for stories about the old days, and listening with wide eyes as Samuel and Laura recounted their adventures. On a warm summer evening, shortly after Samuel's 70th birthday, he and Laura took their usual positions on the porch. The sunset was spectacular, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. They sat in their rocking chairs, hands linked between them, watching the day come to a close. "I have been thinking," Samuel said after a long silence. "About what?" Laura asked. "About that night," he said. "The night you came into my life. Do you think it was fate, or just random chance?" Laura considered the question. "I do not know if I believe in fate," she said slowly. "But I do believe that sometimes the universe gives us what we need, even if we do not know we need it. I needed you, Samuel, and I think you needed me. Maybe that is fate, or maybe it is just grace." "Grace," Samuel repeated. "I like that. The grace of finding you when I had given up on ever being happy again. And the grace of you being there when I needed saving," Laura added. "Both literally that first night and figuratively in all the nights since." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the stars begin to appear. The night was warm and still, and the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night drifted around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and the cattle lowed softly in response. "Laura," Samuel said suddenly, "if you had it to do over again, would you change anything?" Laura thought about it. There had been hard times, certainly. Times when they had barely made ends meet, when the weather had been brutal or the cattle had gotten sick. There had been disagreements and misunderstandings, moments of frustration and anger, but would she change any of it? "No," she said firmly. "I would not change a single thing, because all of it, the good and the bad, brought us here. To this porch, to this life, to these grandchildren sleeping in the house. If I changed even one small thing, who knows what else might be different? No, I would live it all again exactly as it happened." "Me too," Samuel said. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would do it all again, as long as it meant having you by my side." Laura squeezed his hand, too moved to speak. After 70 years of life and more than 35 years of marriage, Samuel could still make her heart flutter with his words. As they finally rose to go inside for the night, Laura paused in the doorway and looked back at the land spread out before them. The ranch that they had built together, the fields and pastures and buildings that represented decades of work and love. And beyond that, the mountains rising dark against the star-filled sky, eternal and unchanging. This was home. Not just the physical place, but the life they had created here. The family they had raised, the love they had shared, the legacy they would leave behind. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible, more than she had ever dared to hope for. And it had all started with a blizzard, a barn, and a cowboy who had seen beauty in her weary eyes. Laura turned to Samuel, who stood waiting for her in the doorway. "Ready?" he asked, holding out his hand. "Ready," she said, taking it. Together, they walked into the house, closing the door on another day and looking forward to whatever tomorrow might bring. Because as long as they were together, they could face anything. And that, Laura thought as she settled into bed beside her husband for the 10,000th time, was the greatest gift of all. Not the ranch, not the family, not even the love itself, but the certainty of having someone by your side through every season of life. Someone who would catch you when you fell, celebrate your victories, and hold you through your sorrows. Samuel was that person for her, and she was that person for him. And after 35 years of marriage and a lifetime of love, that bond was unbreakable. As she drifted off to sleep, Laura's last conscious thought was one of profound gratitude. For the storm that had brought her to Samuel's door, for the man who had taken her in and made her his own, for the life they had built together brick by brick and day by day. It was a good life. No, more than good. It was extraordinary, and she would not have changed a single moment of it.